Welcome everyone to the first round of graduations for OLS-3. So we have been working now for 16 weeks, 4 months, discussing various different aspects relating to open science, to project management, to making sure that people feel included, to community building, to disseminating your work. And we are really excited now that we have several of the project leads from our third cohort here to present and talk about what they've learned and where they will be taking their projects. So we have a few reminders as always, and today we are, just for everyone's awareness, we have both the Zoom call and we are also live streaming to YouTube. So for people who are actually on the Zoom call, I would just request that you keep your microphone muted just to prevent any background noise, and you're always welcome to ask questions or comments if necessary. Just unmute when that happens. So Open Life Science has a code of conduct. We have a link to that in the call notes. That is at openlifesci.org/code of conduct. And if at any point you witness or experience unacceptable behavior, then you can report that to myself, Berenice, Malvika, Emmy, directly. Our email addresses are in the notes document, or alternatively, you can email the whole group, team@openlifesci.org. So that is all of the basic housekeeping stuff. And I think the next thing that we're going to be doing is just hopping straight onto people's presentations. So just as a reminder, the format for this is that we're asking you to spend no more than 5 minutes presenting your work. I'm going to have a timer up on my phone. If we get to 5 minutes and it looks like we need to cut you off just to make sure that everyone else has space to present, I will unmute and you will be able to hear the sound actually live. And then we will politely just ask for you to wrap up as soon as possible. So right now I have 6 names in the roll call and we'll be presenting in that order that is on the roll call. If anyone hasn't added their name to the roll call, now is a great time to do so. But in the meantime, any questions, or shall we start with presentations? I'm going to take that as no. Okay, so Martina, I believe that you are first on this list. Are you ready to present?
I am. Can you hear me though?
We can.
Perfect. Let me share your screen. Can you see it?
We can see. You have 5 minutes. Take it away.
Awesome. So hi everyone, my name is Martina and today I'm going to talk about my OLS project titled Evaluating Reproducibility Trends in AI Cognitive Neuroscience Research Projects, so very long title. This work was also carried out in collaboration with the Turing Way. But in my talk, I'm going to actually focus on how the goals of the project change throughout the OLS program. So we initially set out with 3 main goals in mind. The first one was to create an online guide to conducting reproducible research in cognitive computational neuroscience, or CCN for short, taking into account the different types of computational modeling approaches might require to put into practice different reproducibility techniques. And having identified these practices, our second goal was to measure their use by past and current CCN projects. And the final goal was to develop templates and other practical tools for facilitating these practices. And with these 3 goals in mind, and with everything I learned throughout the OLS program, I created my GitHub repository and used the project's features to track my milestones and tasks. But when I started to actually carry out these tasks, I also reflected deeper on these goals and realized they needed some changing. So in regards to the first goal, I realized there is lots of material on reproducibility practices for computational modeling out there already. And so instead of reinventing the wheel, a more fruitful approach might be to increase their discoverability and structure an overview of these resources. And what a better way to do that than to add these resources and key findings to the Turing Way guide, which is what we are planning to do next. And I also want to mention that although I decided to not create the guide, I learned a lot in the process about these reproducibility practices and was able to give a keynote talk about them at a machine learning conference. And regarding the second goal, I soon realized that the scraping tools for GitHub repositories and scientific papers are not as developed as I thought they were. But more importantly, after doing some reflection following OLS exercises templates, I realized that carrying out this measurement might not be the best way or most efficient way to bring about the change I wanted to make, which is to encourage the use of reproducibility practices in future CCM projects. So for now, I decided to halt this second goal. And in regards to my third goal, this was left intact, but we now have a more specific idea about how to implement it. And in particularly, creating cookie cutter templates for this kind of projects might be a great way to practically encourage the use of these practices. And you can read more about what a cookie cutter template is following the link on my slide. And hopefully in the future, we will also be able to organize community events to foment the development and use of these templates with the community building tools that OLS provided. But to wrap up, the main takeaway I take from my OLS experience in general is that open science training is not just learning how to apply a set of tools to a project, but also learning ways to reflect our own work. Asking ourselves questions like, what changes I'm trying to bring about with my project? Is this the most inclusive way of working? Is this the way that I'm taking care the most of me and my time, etc.? And I'm personally especially grateful for the sometimes difficult conversations that OLS enabled, for example, about structural privileges or biases that are usually not discussed in other programs. And finally, I want to thank Anna, my wonderful mentor, Hao, who very kindly gave me his expert advice on teaching and encouraging reproducibility practices, Malvika, who got me involved with OLS and encouraged me to pursue this project, and Kirsty, who helped me with the reflection exercises. And of course, a huge thanks to the whole OLS community.
Incredible, and you managed that in about 4 minutes, so great job. Can we have a huge round of applause, everyone, for Martina?
Thank you.
Amazing, folks. So in the graduation notes, if anyone has any questions or comments, apologies, I should have thought to mention this earlier, but please do go through and add questions or comments as we're going. Right now on the Etherpad, that is line 66, 67. We may loop back if there's a little bit of time because I think we have enough time for questions as well. Or if anyone wishes to unmute quickly at the minute, please feel free to do so. Nothing like being put on the spot to speak on a live stream. Okay, let's let's continue. Thank you so much, Martina. And we have a little, oh, there you go, that's my timer. Malvika says, I always think at this time I won't get emotional, but it's the first talk and I'm so grateful to Martina for being such a responsible researcher and ally in the Turing way. So that is really beautiful. Thank you, Malvika and Martina. So I think we're going to move on to our next presentation. Katharina, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. So I will just start to share my screen. Wait. Can you see it?
Looks good. Take it away. You have 5 minutes.
Oh, what you see? Sorry, one. Okay. Yeah, I'm Katharina, and my OLS project is Design Practices for Peer Production, and I was mentored by Fotis. So my project is an online resource with design examples for peer production websites, and it is aimed at web and UX designers and citizen science researchers and practitioners and everybody interested in peer production. And it can be found under peerproduced.science/design practices. And here's a short glimpse, but I will go back to that later. So why am I building a resource for peer production websites? So currently I'm a PhD student at the Peer Produced Research Lab at CRI in Paris. And I'm working on the question of how to build online tools that support people who want to do research projects on their own with their own data. So some kind of do-it-yourself research. And my approach is to try and test peer production features for this. And even if you don't know the term peer production, you know the results probably, because projects like Wikipedia or OpenStreetMap or open software are built in this way. So it's an alternative mode of production where self-organizing communities work under a common interest. And some characteristics are that they use open licenses. Usually anybody can join and contribute. Processes are transparent and governance is often open. So it's really not far from open science in general. And so why am I applying this to science? An encyclopedia or software code could be seen as complex knowledge objects that people manage to create in this way. And also, if you think about it, science is about creating complex knowledge objects, especially now that everything's digital. So there's also text and code and data. So it's quite similar. So why not apply this mode of organization to research to enable people to do their own research projects? And while I was doing my background research, I realized that I found it quite hard to pin down how these peer production ideas and ideals translate into actual web design. And if you think about it, people organize online and there's nobody assigning tasks. So the website and the infrastructure is very important. And so I also wanted to find an alternative way to communicate my findings, to share what I found out with people who maybe don't necessarily read scientific papers, like web designers, for example, and also a place where I could share further findings after that I find during my PhD, and also to possibly get input from other people. And so here's a screenshot of the website. So there are peer production elements here in this box and blog articles mainly. And if you click on one of these peer production elements, an explanation follows and an example from Wikipedia and a list of articles that's tagged with communal quality control in this case. And then there's a blog article with explanations on how other platforms actually implemented this element of peer production, so people can get inspired for their own websites. How can other people contribute or use my site? So people could definitely add blog articles about peer production features or ideas for blog articles or feedback, code for the website template, or it would also be amazing if people could just get inspiration for their own website and share their experiences. Yeah, there's also a template, so you don't have to start from zero when you want to write a blog article. Regarding OLS, my goals were at the beginning to set up the website, write some blog entries and make it open, even though I didn't exactly know what it meant. And the OLS program helped me in particular to accomplish my reflections on why and how, like with the vision statement at the beginning and the roadmap. It helped a lot to organize my work. And then one big point was a focus on the contributors. So reflections on accessibility, on what types of users there could be in contributors, also their reasons to contribute and the value of the project, and how to acknowledge people. And so next steps will be for me to ask for feedback. So feel free to have a look at the website and give feedback. I know there's still a lot to do, but it's a start. Then I want to add articles, update the website template accordingly, maybe. And also spread the word and invite contributors. And my first step was to publish the preprint, which we did 2 days ago. So that's the preprint that my work is based on. So if you are interested in this, have a look. And yeah, thanks a lot for your attention. And I would like to thank the whole OLS community for the great program, and especially my mentor, Fotis, the CRI in my lab and my supervisor, who also helped me a lot, and the Autistica Citizen Science Project with Georgia and Kirsty, where I worked last year during the summer for 2 months, and which also inspired me to take part in OLS because Georgia is a graduate from the last OLS cohort. And also, I would like to thank Georgia's mentor, Nelda, because she encouraged me to actually start my own project. Thanks.
Amazing. Can we have a round of applause for Katharina? Incredible. And I would like to also just point out that we actually have 7 people watching on YouTube as well. So even if this call seems quiet, we've actually got almost twice as many people as it might look like right now. So huge thank you, folks. Katharina, I was especially inspired by seeing that you actually have a preprint out just as of a couple of days ago. I am really excited to want to go and look at that later, actually, I have to admit.
It's a good timing, really. I guess it's a coincidence that it was just 2 days ago, but yeah, would be great if you have a look.
I'm absolutely so thoroughly delighted. So folks, if you have questions or comments, please bring them in on the agenda document line 74. But for now, I'm actually going to hand over, and I think, Malvika, you're going to present the next 2?
Yeah, thanks, you. I just wanted to also mention Katharina has put a pull request for a blog that will come out on OLS website too. So great work and amazing 2 talks. I'm already very excited. The 2 speakers that I'll be chairing will start with Dario Pescini, who's leading the project seeding.
I will start to share my screen. I will try. Let's see. Okay. Can you see it? Okay. This is my project, and it started in. I want to show you my journey in the OLS. So this is how I get into an OLS. I always worked with open science tools, open software mainly, and a lot of pieces of my puzzle in my mind, but they were not so arranged. At many spots, I heard about US open science coming in and out. So I was raising my ears to see if I can get a more coherent way of the stuff, and I wanted to start to work in open science manner in my everyday life. And meanwhile, my university was starting to giving some infrastructures on the cloud for working with this kind of tool, and then I wanted to look into them to see if there was a way to exploit them and to use them in a proper manner. So the first prompt was to look into my university if there was a guidance, a sort of way to have a coherent approach, an organic approach to open science, and to collect all my pieces, all the jigsaw that I have in my mind, all the puzzle, to have a coherent access. This wasn't the case because they were developing a lot of infrastructure, and they're still developing the infrastructure or the tools, and I think they are building a sort of path toward open science because they are working in giving this the accession to these tools. Since I saw that there was not yet a project, a coordination toward an open science approach within my university, I decided to do that myself. And then I started to look around because I would like to create a core team that would be able to help people within my university to work toward this path. So how will be able to fill the gap? Can I help the other if I have to help myself before helping the others? So I was looking to see if I will be able to have a complete path in an open science journey. In the meanwhile, I had a project that was running in my lab. It was I had the chance at building this framework, this computational framework. So I had the chance to go from all the paths. So from having the idea, realizing them, writing the paper, constructing all the tools, and putting all the opening to the community, and what else. So I decided to use this small project, this small computational framework as a leverage to discover all the corners that I have to see to set up my environment, to have an open access approach to open science. Then what happened on this project? I was able to collect all the elements, and I exploited some of the features of GitHub. Then I started to, even if I was always using Git as a technology to share my software with the others, this time I wanted to open everything to the others and start to use GitHub. Thanks to OLS, I started to take the right path within this project. Then I started to use the wiki, the issues, making some pull, having the documentation, and commenting everything in a proper manner. And so this time my project is really open to the others, and it can be accessible. Everyone can access it and comment it and exploit it, fork and do whatever they need to do, or to comment or to improve my work. Hopefully, my mentor, that I really thanks a lot, it's Berenice, provided me a checklist to ensure the openness of my software. So in this time, I have a guidance to follow to have an open access software. Hopefully, I have a prepin that this is out, because we are working in the meanwhile where we are during the project in OLS. And even more, we have a paper that is currently under review in an open access journal. So we have this, let's say, this short-term project has been quite successful, and we will see what happens on. What happens in the long-term project? I wanted to find a way to build this core team in my university. I found some problem in the path, because it's quite difficult to set all the pieces together of this puzzle in a really structured environment like the university, like the academic environment is. So I'm still exploring this path, but I learned and understood the relevance of building a community around the project. So I started to investigate this path, and I'm working on this side for the seeding project. What's next for my two projects? I have the small one. I want to get always. We want to improve our tools and make them open to the community. So I will follow the path, moving it to Galaxy to widen the potential users for my project. I want to improve also the computational side of my project, so I will go to machine learning and other tools to see what happens if I can expand its capabilities. And on the long-term seeding, here I don't want to stop. I want to explore another approach that is collecting the ideas from my peers and start to set a bottom-up approach, I would say, in computational environment. And so I want to test and investigating with my peers if we can set up this kind of team to help all the others. But I discovered the importance of disseminating open science toward the new generation of scientists. So I'm starting to coordinate a new project. It's called Biobanking. There's a project within an open science project within my PhD course. It's not, or better, the PhD course in which I'm involved into. And I would like to bring my PhD students in the next cohort of OLS, because I want them to understand and appreciate all the instruments that I learned during my journey here in OLS. I want to thank everyone for the attention. Mainly, besides this, I want to mention thanks Berenice, that helped me a lot and sustain me during this path that had some troubles during the journey, and also all the community that I encountered here in OLS, because you were always inclusive and supporting in any case for any situation that I can encounter. So thanks a lot for the help that you gave me.
Thank you, Dario. Can we all give a big round of applause? That's really inspiring. I have added actually one question for everybody, and I'm hoping that at the end of the call we're going to revisit and ask you all. And I'm really excited to learn more about all you're doing. So I'm going to move on to our next speaker, Carly Monks, working on ethical open data in Australian archaeology.
Hi. Just going to share my screen. Is that working? Yep.
Yeah, looks good.
All right, thank you. Okay, so today I am talking about sort of the ethics of open data in Australian archaeology. So I'm an archaeologist, and over the last, say, 10 or 15 years, there's been a bit of a surge in the interest in not just open access, but particularly around sharing data in archaeology. And that's partly because archaeology is an inherently destructive form of science. So when we excavate at a site or when we undertake analysis, we're often destroying the record that we're actually making at the same time. So open data has been argued as one of the more, I guess, ethical ways of doing archaeology by making your data freely available to people to reuse. And that's led to a proliferation of publications on it, but also things like data platforms. So this is Open Context, which is one of a whole range of data sharing platforms in archaeology. And most of these are being led by international groups, particularly based in UK and Europe and North America. As far as I'm aware, there aren't any in Australia that are freely available. There are some that are sort of government hosted, but nothing that's truly open. And it often comes down to this idea that people are saying that, you know, open science is good for everyone. And that's presumably why we're all here. We believe that open science is the future of scientific research, but it's not necessarily good for everyone. And I think it's important for us to reflect on the fact that there are some groups of people who are actually disadvantaged by open science and certain elements, including things like open data. So archaeology is not just destructive, but it's also a very colonialist discipline. So we have a long colonial history, particularly put forward by British and North American colonial contexts, where archaeologists have gone into regions that they're not from, and they have obtained data through one form or another with communities who live in those regions, then taken that data back and analysed it sort of in a vacuum away from the cultural context to understand variation and relationships between people and our ancestors. And that's why I find things like Open Context, with its tagline of "because data are for discovery and inspiration, not just management," to be sometimes a little bit complex or naive in some ways. You know, there's this rhetoric of discovery in archaeology that is going through a bit of a challenge at the moment. We're not discovering things, we're often describing things that have been known by groups of people for a long period of time. So to then move this onto the frontier of open data and still claim that we're discovering things is maybe a little bit problematic. Which brings me to my OLS journey. So I started in December when I first saw this program thinking, okay, well, this is great. I can start a nice little study about open data in Australian environmental archaeology. I can look at whether we're adopting open data, how it's being shared, what the policies are for publication, and, you know, maybe I'll get a couple of little papers out of it. It'll be great. You know, it's a good way of testing the waters and seeing what is going to happen with open data in Australia. But it kind of opened up a whole can of worms. The more I thought about it, the more I started to think, you know, why should we be sharing data openly? And then I started to think, well, should we share data openly? And then I started to think, as a white archaeologist, when most archaeologists are white, wait, who is we? And do we even have the right to share the data? Which then ended up with my project, which is looking at who has the right to own, keep and share archaeological data, and how can we do this in a way that's ethical and safe for the communities that we work with. And I've got a little quote off to the side here from Eric Kanzer from a paper in 2012, where he was arguing that open science in general is the way forward, but he's got a note on open data saying that the discipline shouldn't continue to tolerate the personal, self-aggrandizing appropriation of cultural heritage that comes with data hoarding. And I think that maybe the language being used there is a little bit iffy. When we talk about appropriation of cultural heritage, if it's to do with people who are caretaking their own cultural heritage and the data that comes from that, that's not data hoarding, that's cultural awareness and you know, culturally appropriate management of data. So I said that we're seeing a resurgence or a sort of surge in the adoption of open data in archaeology, and this is just a quick look from Web of Science at the number of publications per year that have mentioned open archaeology. And you can see, looking at the one on the left, the graph on the left, you're seeing a massive uptick in the last sort of 15 years in terms of references to open archaeology in publications. And in Australia, it's no different. So if we look to the graph on the right, that's just narrowing it down to fields that talk, to papers that talk about open archaeology and Australia. It's seeing that same trend. But what this doesn't often interact with is things like the code of ethics that have been put forward by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in Australia, who we work with, to look at the archaeological record. So this is in general an approach to any data sharing that involves Aboriginal people. And there are two principles that are quite relevant here. One is that Indigenous people should be retaining ongoing ownership, control and access to research results. And the other is that institutions, and by default researchers, should adopt Indigenous data sovereignty and governance principles, and that where there's a conflict between accessibility and Indigenous rights should prevail. And this is also encouraging researchers to use fair and care data principles. So my project and program goals overall were focused around the problem of open data is increasingly encouraged in archaeology, but how do we identify and manage the risks posed to Indigenous communities? So with that in mind, my project goals have kind of changed over the duration of the project, but you know, that's how it goes. And it's now basically looking at developing a code of conduct or manifesto for open archaeology in Australia that prioritises Indigenous data sovereignty, provides a guideline and framework for developing community-led data policies in line with fair and care principles, and situates decision-making at the location of the data, not the location of the PI or the publisher. And I won't go through this because I probably don't have time, but I do just want to note that something we need to be mindful of with open science, and something that has been emphasised again and again in everything that I've read and seen through OLS and through this program, has been that we might be failing to acknowledge that power structures and knowledge inequalities exist in the communities that we work with, and that sometimes the open science policies that we, with the best of intentions, put forward just help to recreate the status quo in terms of hierarchies of colonial knowledge. So we need to think about for whom science is being opened and who stands to benefit and who might suffer some risks when we talk about open science. So the next steps in the project, it's been a bit of a slow.
Sorry, we're over time. Maybe.
Oh,
yeah.
Sure, I will just move on then. So if you wanted to have a look at this, I'll put the slides up later. And I just want to say thank you to everybody in the Open Life Sciences team, and to my mentor, Esther, who has been wonderful and very knowledgeable about all of the open data policies and very helpful in guiding me through this process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carly. That's a very inspiring and very unique perspective. Round of applause, everybody. I'm gonna move on and give the mic to Berenice.
Thanks, Manvika. So the next speaker is Manuel. Manuel, are you ready to share your screen? Looks good. Perfect.
Great. Can you see that? And can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Good. Great. Well, thanks for allowing me to present what I've done as part of OLS-3. I'll be talking about an open data schema for actigraphy data in chronobiology and sleep research. And this is work that I've done with a great team of collaborators, Nayantara Santi, Christina Blume, Christina Schmidt-Gregory Amat, and Vincent van Hees, and our mentor is Mallory Freeberg. So just to orient you at the problem, one of the things that we're interested in, so we're all chronobiologists and interested in understanding the effect of light exposure on sleep and wake cycles. And one of the research tools that is often used there are these ActiWatches. And these are kind of Fitbits, but a little less useful than Fitbits because they're generally not displaying any information, and it's really kind of a research grade version of these tools. And what they're generally recording is light exposure at the wrist, as well as basically movement. And what you can basically give this to a participant in research and then collect data for a couple of weeks to then assess, is their sleep regular, is their sleep fragmented, and so on, and extract various parameters. One of the problems that we have seen is that all of the data that are generated aren't really in any standard format. And as a consequence, it's very, very difficult, I think, to say aggregate data from different groups, because you always need to make sure you understand fully what the specific manufacturer's format is. And in some cases, these are also proprietary. So very hard to kind of make this, conform to the FAIR principles. And in addition, on top of this, there's almost a culture issue or culture problem, which is that just different laboratories have different conventions to format data, document it, and just collect data and store it and format it and organize it. And of course, then these are two quite interesting problems as we're thinking about really trying to generate data that is useful for other labs, for example, to look at. And so I guess this is kind of the state of the art. You have different devices, different conventions, and just no standard to make things easy and shareable. And so our objectives really as part of OLS-3 was to develop a data and metadata standard that was consistent with existing practices and where possible with existing ontologies, and really try to, not reinvent the wheel, but really try to fit it into the kind of existing ecosystem in some way. And another thing, and I'm still kind of in the early stages of where we're at with the project, is to engage with the community, because ultimately, I think such a data standard is only useful if we are thinking about making it, easy for people to use it. Now, what have we accomplished? So the first thing, and we're still working on this, is kind of understanding the various components of what goes into this data package that we've been thinking about. And it's been really instructive just to learn from each other. So we're a group of people who work in different labs at different institutions, have different kind of training backgrounds, but we're all interested in making this data fair. And the conversations, so we've had many conversations just trying to understand, well, what is the information that is important, and how do we store this? And so we've now developed a first kind of draft of what we call a study descriptor, which I think here you see a snapshot or a screenshot of the JSON that we've implemented this in, that basically describes the study and what kinds of things have been done in the study, what the sample is composed of, etc. We're also working then on various other kind of hierarchically nested descriptors, so an acquisition. So whenever we collect data, that would be an acquisition. And then specifically then also the data itself, right? So in there's various interesting things to think about, because all of these devices, of course, report something, but they will be reporting these in different ways and have different accuracies attached to it. So we're after some various rounds of discussions, we've converged at least the study descriptor, and I think we're quite eager to take this forward. And you can see here, one of the things that we've adopted is, of course, we need to describe the contributors of this, and we've put in, for example, we've inherited here the contributor role ontology as well as the credit. So all of these things are kind of consistent with all the things that are already existent. In the future work, I think we're really kind of trying to chip away at what we're working on. And one of the considerations that we really have been thinking about is kind of this principle of thinking about, well, what is the data that we should collect? And in a way, if we propose a schema, we're very much making a political decision almost to say, well, this is an important dimension of the data that we care about. And of course, this is something to be really careful with. And then in a way, I also identified this a little bit in tension with this question of, you want to minimize data collection where possible.
Manuel, you are just on the time. So just to mention a bit of yeah.
So should I wrap up?
Quickly, yeah, please.
Okay, great. So the next step will be releasing a draft, and then also, of course, kind of moving forward this. I just want to thank Mallory for guiding us through this process, Laura Carter, who we've had some great conversations with about this question of recording gender information, our gender identity. Of course, I also want to thank Yo Multi-Cambridge for really organizing this, and the entire OLS-3 community. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Can we have a big round of applause for Manuel? Thanks a lot. And yeah, we will move to the next speaker and the last speaker of today. Emma, do you want? Yeah, great.
Yes, I can share my screen. How's that?
It's loading. Yeah, sounds good. Look good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, morning everyone. Thanks for joining. My name's Emma Lawrence, and I'm going to be representing my colleague Jessica Sims to talk about our project on biobanking in the UK. So let me just move this. Biobanks are organisations that collect, store and distribute human tissue samples for medical research. They're really important resources for medical research. They kind of just look like big storage facilities like this picture here. But there's an issue in the UK that researchers don't always know where they are or how to find them or to access them. And it's really important that they can get them for their research. So our project is curating the UK's only cross-disease human sample directory. So essentially researchers can go online and search for the samples that they're looking for. And our project's called the Tissue Directory and Coordination Centre. This is our logo. And importantly, it's housed between UCL and the University of Nottingham. And Jessica and I work at UCL and we do a lot of the comms and engagement work, but there's also a team in Nottingham that do a lot of the coding and the work for the actual online directory. So the problem's not quite solved because it's quite difficult for biobanks to register their sample collections in the directory. So we put a lot of energy into engaging with them to try and get them to upload information about the samples they have. And this is because they typically don't have good data systems. They tend to be people that have a sort of biology background rather than a data background. There are also various shapes and sizes. There isn't really a one-size-all-fits system for the biobanks. And so to help with this, the tech team in Nottingham have developed an application programming interface, an API, which can help with the data upload. And so I put a little diagram here so you can see that all of their different various databases can interact with this API to get the data into the tissue directory. So we wanted to use the OLS program to sort of help us roll out this API, but importantly, sort of use our comms and engagement background to, gosh, sorry, people digging in my road, and use our comms and engagement background to sort of really bring in the community and help roll out the API, but also get their input in how it's useful and develop resources, and so to make sure that it's used effectively. And so our plan was to publish a blog on the API and sort of hold a workshop type webinar where we get feedback on it and feedback on our resources, but also hopefully sort of co-write documentation and onboarding resources with the biobanks. What actually happened was we found it quite difficult communicating with the team in Nottingham, particularly sort of getting dates for when things would be ready, knowing who to approach, so both internally, so who in Nottingham was sort of responsible for the API and who we should be working with, but also externally in terms of which biobanks would be useful to be testing the API and engaging with, because it would only be sort of rolled out to a few participants to begin with. So sort of reflect on what we did do, so we did manage to publish a blog on the API, which is on our website, and we featured it in our newsletter. So we did manage to communicate a bit about what we were doing, and we did have a great meeting with one of the database providers who have been working on sort of integrating the API with their database. So we did have some really good outputs, and we've learned a lot of lessons. So there are loads of areas we'd like to embed some of the principles in our work, the principle of open by design. So like to be better at using sort of road mapping tools when we start projects rather than sort of starting them without planning. Using code of conduct. So we already have quite a good biobanking community that we've established, but I think you've been better with having more formal code of conducts and using them a lot better. Jessica and I really understand GitHub a lot better, which we didn't really before, which has helped with, I think, with communicating with the guys in Nottingham, understand how they work. Definitely using preprints and, for example, making better use of sort of resources we have. Like we have a lot of webinars recorded and educational resources that we do that we've never really cited and indexed properly. So those kind of things I think we'll take forward from our course. So for the future, so we've already had a really good call with the University of Nottingham team to sort of work through some of the issues we've had, but we want to arrange regular calls with them, probably monthly, to make sure that we're both sort of aligned with what's going on. Next month we're going to write our code of conduct for our Biobank Alliance, and then the rest of the year we're going to do a lot better at indexing and using licenses for all of our existing and future online educational resources. Sorry about the noise has stopped now, thank goodness. And so yeah, that's it really. Thanks to our whole cohort, the OLS team, but special thanks to our mentor Sarah for helping us navigate the wider relationship with our team. And we'd love to stay in touch, so this is our Twitter handle and URL and our GitHub. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Emma. Nice. Can we have a big round of applause for Emma? Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody. I will hand in to Malvika. She will handle the question, some question now.
Today we have more time than usual, and we all have one question for each. For the last team, folks, if you have comments and questions for Emma, please write them in line number 115. So I'll go back to our first speaker, Martina. So it's really inspiring to see how you have reflected on and redesigned your goal to make the change you wanted to see. I really like the phrase that you said. How did you feel about changing your original plan, and what was so difficult and what helped?
So this is a great question. I think that what really helped me, or what was difficult at the beginning, is that I have all these doubts and I kept them on my mind. I really didn't talk with anybody for a week about these doubts, but then I sent a message to Kirsty saying, hey, I'm having a lot of doubts, can we chat? And just a 5-minute conversation was really what it took to make me feel sure about my doubts, that they were actually, to validate my doubts and to actually be able to do something practical afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you, Martina. That's really useful. I'm sure Kirsty would be delighted to hear. I'm going to move to Katharina. Really wonderful to see how you transferred your previous experience into building your own idea. Can you reflect on what was most challenging about owning your idea as a project, and how did your research group support you in the process?
Yeah, I just read the question and was thinking about it and tried to retrace the process. And actually, I think my first idea for OLS was to just make my whole PhD open. Like I already have a GitHub repository for my PhD, but then I talked to my supervisor and he advised me to do something smaller for a start. And so I actually talked with him about it. So he supported me from the start by doing this project. So I had like no problems with like getting the time during my work for doing this project from my group, which was amazing.
And do you see, I'm adding an extra question, do you see that this is going to be helpful as you go forward with your PhD?
I think so, and I hope so also, because I also wanted to have a place where I can share further findings and where I can like easily share further findings, because like I just published a preprint and it's so much work and so much formalities, and having already a blog with blog post templates, I can just write a blog article, which is a lot faster. So I want to use it as a personal notebook and also like spread the word and hopefully get some contributors along the way. But I plan to work it during to use it during my PhD.
Thanks, Katharina. Dario, let me scroll down to your question. So what you presented is a really thorough work towards a structural change, and I personally find it very inspiring. Do you foresee that your institute and group members will face specific barriers in adopting the workflow and process you have developed, as you mentioned that you would like to build community around it?
Yeah, more than the real, how to say, technical problems, there are the it's like having the gears, and you have to all the teeth of the gears to have them moving coordinately. So this is the biggest problem, I think. So finding a way to have all the pieces of the jigsaw putting together, it's quite difficult. You have to put the right pieces in the right place. But in the meanwhile, I saw that when you talk with each people, I try to engage people from tech side of the university and from the law side of the university. Or this, because if you work with sensitive data, you also have to think about that that perspective. And everyone is keen to get in a project like that, but you have to be move careful to see if everything is fitting in the right place. And you see, academia sometimes is really open because you want to go towards science, but you want to do fast and you want to be the first. So it's two paces with respect to open science. There you want to share, and you have to find a way to make them to talk.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think a good collaboration takes time, and often that's the reason why people don't do it.
Maybe I was just too ingenious to start in such rush, but you have to start from somewhere. So
very, very inspiring. We would really like to hear from you, because I think a lot of people we know want to build these kind of open labs, for example. I'm going to ask the next question actually now to Carly. Carly, there is, so I had never heard about CARE principle. So thank you for sharing that. And everybody said that they love that ethical context here, such tough thing to deal with, but so important. And my question is, have you faced resistance against the CARE principle in data sharing and use in your field?
Yes and no. No, because I don't think too many people have tried to apply it yet in Australian archaeology. So I don't, to my knowledge, there hasn't been too much engagement with it yet. But that's also because we're still in a process of negotiating what to do with physical artifacts. So we have a big issue here at the moment in terms of what happens to artifacts and human remains in particular once they have been excavated as part of an archaeological project, which human remains are usually only ever excavated in an emergency situation, like if they're being damaged. It's not something that's normally part of a research project here. But once those remains and cultural artifacts have been recovered, where do they go? And so at the moment, there's negotiations going on about how do people actually manage the physical artifacts with giving Indigenous people rights and maintaining access if that's what the community wants. So I don't think anybody's even tried to apply that into the data sphere yet. And I think that's one of the reasons that I find this project so interesting and where I want to take it with the working group is creating some sort of guideline or framework where people can actually borrow some of those ideas or approaches and use them when they're talking to communities and developing these things from the very beginning. So yes, does that answer your question?
I think it totally does. And I think something you touched on, accessibility, and the next question someone has written is, how do you see getting over the accessibility issue from the FAIR principle, let's say, if you're promoting that data should not be open due to ethical reasons? It's a big question. Yeah. So
that's a huge question, and it's something that I have no idea where to even start with. So I'm always open to ideas there.
Yeah, no, Esther is correct at saying FAIR isn't same as open. So accessibility should be ensuring internally who the stakeholders are and how they get the access. But yeah, very important discussion to have. Manuel, I think you've set a good example of how group leader collaborates with their members and explores new topic together, in contrast to letting them know that there's this tool, go and learn about it, and not really knowing how their students face challenge. However, I see that this is a lot of time constraint in terms of you have to do a lot of admin tasks and also sit with your students. So how do you manage it with your mentorship responsibility?
I mean, I think in this specific instance, I think I just was lucky in that my team just was very interested in working on this and naturally had a drive to make it work. And so I think in terms of kind of managing it as the project leader, I think it was mostly kind of making sure we have meetings in the calendar, making sure that everyone has access to the right information, and everything kind of just fell into place. But all of that, I feel like this is kind of one thing that I've really started to appreciate is, the logistics of it are key. And, sharing notes and sharing just a summary if someone couldn't make it to the meeting, all of this just makes, it does seem like a lot of work, but ultimately it just ensures that the projects flow. So I think that's one thing I definitely took away, is that the organizing and the logistics is key for success.
Yeah, thank you. That's very validating. I'm going to give it to Yo, who's going to ask the last question and wrap up.
Cool. Thanks, Malvika, and thanks everyone who's been answering some insightful questions. Plus, there's a great ongoing FAIR discussion, the accessibility of FAIR versus openness in the chat about the narrow and slightly confusing differences. So I have one last question just for Emma, which is that you mentioned you're planning to use open licenses in your future training materials, and I was just super curious what sort of training you are planning in association with the Biobank.
So we've run sort of webinar series in the past, like on topics like working with industry, but also we have an annual event which we're going to try and record. We have recorded, and we'll try and record the sessions from. So, for example, last year there was a session on building an online presence, where we had someone talk about SEO and being found online. So that would be useful for biobanks, not just in the UK but elsewhere. So it's just sort of pulling together, different things that we've got that I think will be useful to biobanks both in the UK and abroad.
That sounds really useful. Definitely share those materials when they get them online with the community, because I imagine a lot of us will be very interested to hear about this as well, to be fair. Okay, folks, I think it is time to wrap up. So I am actually going to stop screaming. I'm going to stop screaming as well, but I am going to stop streaming so that we can do a group photo. So a bit of a quick wave just to everyone who's on the stream. We love you. We hope you had a great fun. And I am stopping the streaming now. How do I stop the streaming? I think Berenice, since you're the host, since I accidentally assigned you to host, you might have to stop the streaming.